as we'll get going. Again, like I keep on saying every single time, very hard to believe we're doing this again in the midst of war. On Tuesday, first day of Pesach, it will be the 200th day of this war. Very, very hard to believe, and even harder to believe 200 days when our hostages, how many of them are still alive, are still in captivity. Very, very hard to get your heads around that. It really is. I said a couple of days ago when I was on I-24, I said to Kalev, who's one of the long-term correspondents, I said to him, what I hope for is to go back to the days I used to appear on your show to talk about Boeing, because I'm also their aviation person. But he laughed and said, yeah, that would be nice, instead of what we're talking about these days. I wish I was having these Zoom to talk about the latest advances in Israeli technology, all sorts of new breakthroughs in society, who knows what. But no, we're still talking about war, unfortunately, 200 days later, in what will go down as our most disastrous war, I guess, is the only way we can put it, war in our history, unfortunately. The only good thing when I was in the States and people asked me if we can add on something positive, we had one positive thing this past week, and we'll get to that in a little bit, but one positive thing that we can say is our technology actually does work. Despite the fact that our advanced fence failed for all sorts of reasons on October 7th, and it wasn't because of the fence, our billions and billions that we've invested in air defense and anti-missile systems that everyone laughed at worked. And it gives us at least some sense of a limited security at the moment that we have a system. We're the only country in the world that has such a system and does actually work. In any case, 200 days in, it's hard to say war. It's a very difficult. In Israel, we talk about it, and is there a war going on? Is it really a war at this point? There's a war going on the northern border, quite clearly. Quite clearly, every single day, 50, 100 rockets, maybe 20, depends on the day, are fired at the communities along the northern border and some of the army bases. Some of them actually impact. Some of the ones that are anti-tank missiles, there's basically no defense from point to point in short distance. And slowly but surely, a lot of the communities, if not being destroyed, are being hurt very badly. People are not there. Mostly it's the army who's in all of these communities. But it's a real war up there. And 100,000, well, 80,000 people from there are not living in their homes. So 80,000 people this Passover will not be having their seders in their homes, will not be having their family over because they're living out of hotel rooms all over the country. And yet somehow it's okay, we can continue. In Gaza, there is no war at the moment in Gaza. There's a tremendous amount of humanitarian aid going in, and it's one of these really bizarre situations, sad situations. We gave almost everything that Hamas wanted. We've given tremendous amount of humanitarian aid is going in. There's been most Israeli troops have pulled out, at least for the moment. We didn't guarantee we'd stay out, but except in one area, there are no Israeli troops, and we got no hostages back. Just think about how poorly this was managed, that we've pulled mostly out of Gaza. We're giving them incredible amounts of humanitarian aid. This nonsense about starvation or soon to be starvation is, I said that weeks and weeks ago, but now it's really absurd with the amount of aid that's going in. But they're still talking about it, and yet we got zero hostages as a result of all of this. So we haven't destroyed Hamas. We've hurt them. We've blown up some tunnels, a lot of tunnels maybe. We've killed a lot of their military people, but they're replaceable. We have not destroyed Hamas as an organization, and we have not created any sort of framework what to replace Hamas with. So whenever we pull out, who comes back? Hamas, because there's no one else there. And why? Because this government can't have even a meeting to discuss it. It's, one of the most absurd situations. Forget even implementing a policy or having a policy. You can't even meet to discuss a policy because that might undermine the very, the coalition. And so we're sitting in a situation where we've been fighting a war for 6 months with no political goals. We cannot have a war without political goals, and we have no political goals, and therefore we've achieved very little other than unfortunately the deaths of soldiers because of the fact that we have no political goals. If any of you remember from the very early in this conflict, when I wrote one of the first updates, I wrote, "You do not go to war without a plan, without a strategic plan." And that's what Israel needs, a strategic plan. What do we want to see the day after? And it can be, it could be something I don't agree with. It could be, let's resettle all of Gaza and bring in settlements. I think it's a terrible idea, but at least it's a plan. You work towards achieving that goal. But with no plan, you have nothing. And that's what we have. Political power paralysis with absolutely nothing. About an hour ago, former defense minister and theoretically the leading candidate to replace Netanyahu, and I say that theoretically, I'd be happy to talk about politics of this in a few minutes. Benny Gantz got on TV for a special message to the people at 4:15 in the afternoon. Special message. The news broadcasts all went to him. Was he going to say something dramatic? Was he going to give an ultimatum? Was he going to plan on leaving the government? Was he going to suggest something else? No, all he basically says, we cannot do this, and we have to do this, and we should be doing this, and we'll keep on fighting until we win, basically. He said nothing. Interestingly enough, it's I wrote about yesterday about a conference I went to of the trying to meld all the left side of the political spectrum into one. And Yair Golan, who was the leader, basically will become the leader of that, said about Gantz, for 5 years he hasn't said anything at all. That's what he said today. Nothing. Got off. And it was really like, what did he say? Why did we all stop to listen to him? He didn't have anything to say, really. And neither does anyone else. And Netanyahu just spoke and said, we won't forget the hostages on Pesach. They're on our minds. And in the next coming days, we will increase the military and political pressure on Hamas. Okay. What have you been doing for the last 6 months? For the first month and a half, there was a lot of pressure on Hamas. And then we sort of got lost in the tunnels of Khan Yunis, and we stopped putting any new pressure on Hamas. And now we're putting no pressure. We're going to put new pressure. I hope so. Is there pressure we can put? Maybe. But we can't move into Rafah anytime immediately because we pledged that we would move the 1.5 million refugees out of there first. And that will take maybe 6 weeks, 8 weeks to accomplish that. And as we move 6 to 8 weeks to move the refugees out, does anyone really believe that the people we want to get are still going to be there when we get there? And that's what happened throughout this war. We went one place, the hostages and the leadership of Hamas went somewhere else. And that's how this war has been fought. We go one place, they go somewhere else. And that's been this war in Gaza. It's some version of, just knock it down, up they come, knock it down, up they come. Whack-a-mole. My wife reminding me, but whack-a-mole, that's what it's been. So that doesn't win. It doesn't win a war by playing whack-a-mole. You'll see in today's update, I've gotten up to the Suez, the actual battles in Sinai in 1956, and it's so sad to read that there was a half a day battle, maybe almost a whole day battle to conquer Rafah, which was held strongly by the Egyptians. Once that was conquered, all the rest of Gaza was conquered by the home front troops from local kibbutzim in a matter of hours. And all of Gaza was a matter of hours, all of Gaza was taken. We're now 6 months. I mean, again, things are different. They're much stronger. A lot of different things we could say. But hours versus 6 months, and we still haven't done it. In any case, that's where we stand in Gaza. And I can't tell you where we stand. I mean, we stand nowhere. So we stand nowhere. There's no light in terms of the hostages. No, don't get me wrong. The hostages and the reason their hostages aren't home is 90% because Hamas doesn't want to let them go. They don't want to let them go because they see no advantage. And we haven't put them in position to force them to give up the hostages. That's the reality. We may or may not have gotten further if we had been more flexible earlier. What we would agree, with one of these situations, it's almost the reverse of the Palestinians when we talk about the history of the conflict. We're willing to agree to what the Hamas wanted 2 weeks ago, some version therein. But now it's too late. Now they want something else. And so we're in this terrible situation. We don't know how many of them are alive. The reports from foreign media were claiming that the Shabak, the secret services, believe there are only 40 still alive. They deny that directly here. They said that is not true. That's not what they believe. They didn't say how much they do believe are alive. But some number considerably under 130 is what we're speaking about. We don't know what number. And of course, every day that goes by, the number goes down a little bit more. That's where we stand vis-a-vis Gaza. Let's turn to the north and then we'll go to Iran. We continue this tit for tat. Any given day, we strike at Hezbollah targets in Lebanon. We kill 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 Hezbollah fighters every single day. And they fire rockets anywhere from 10 to 60 or 70 at any given day, both at the area of the northern, what's called the confrontation line, meaning the kibbutzim right along the border, like Hanita and Malkia and those kibbutzim, Rosh Nikra, and the towns that are there, which is basically Kiryat Shmona, Shlomi, and one or two other towns that are really right on the border. And that goes on day by day. In addition, the northern part of the Golan Heights is hit almost on a regular basis. Now, the Golan Heights is still fully occupied by people. Only the area within 3 kilometers of the northern border have the people left, but been forced to leave by the government, and of course are paid to live somewhere else. People in the Golan Heights are living in their homes, and they're getting almost daily some sort of bombardment from somewheres. But in most cases, basically until now, all cases that a community or a base has been in danger, the missiles have been knocked down, or the rockets more correctly, knocked down before they can hit. The Hezbollah continues from time to time to hit the Air Force base on Mount Meron. That's basically a huge radar dome and listening station. It's within direct line of sight to the Lebanese border, which means the anti-tank missiles that are so effective, and there's no effective way of defending against them, have hit that site a number of times. It's not clear, this will end if we come to a ceasefire in Gaza. Without a ceasefire in Gaza, I don't really see how this ends, unless we go to full-scale war with Hezbollah. And that means all the things, all the rockets on Tel Aviv, on Haifa, all those sort of things that everyone's hoping is not going to happen, can't afford to happen, quite honestly. And so it's not clear how this comes to an end in terms of Hezbollah. The only way is really to bring the South to an end one way or the other. And that's, like I said a minute ago, I don't see where that's happening anytime soon. So it's not good. It's not good. Lastly, well, sort of lastly, Iran. Look, there's no question that when we killed that Iranian general who was responsible for liaison and setting up Iranian forces in Syria and Lebanon, he was a target that was worth assassinating. Yeah, there's some questions. Do direct assassinations work? Are they effective? The answer is they're effective for a while, and there's no more effective way we really know. These are people with a lot of knowledge, institutional knowledge, and they're not easily replaced. Soldiers and these things can be easily replaced. These people are not easily replaced. But I doubt that if anyone if anyone thought the scenario would be a full-scale response from Iran for doing that, they probably would have decided not to do it. A bright reader commented to me that it's a mistake to expect your intelligence services to predict anything. The best the intelligence services can do is tell you what's happening, give you a picture of the events, but to expect the intelligence services to be able to be predictive in nature is a mistake. And I guess part of our mistakes overall, and this is the same mistake in terms of our, what's called the Concepcia on October 7th, was we based our actions based on predictions. Predictions by the intelligence services and others that Hamas was deterred, they weren't going to take any action. We thought that the Iranians were deterred and they wouldn't take any direct action. Instead of inferring, based on, taking action based on what your intelligence services claim to be to be what's going to happen, you need instead to rely on the intelligence services to say, okay, Hamas has 4,000 rockets, actually had 10,000 rockets. It has 5,000 Nukhba troops ready to attack at any time, etc., etc., etc. Iran has 200 ballistic missiles. It has whatever it has. That's all the intelligence service can do. And it's your responsibility as a government leader to assume the worst and basically make your decisions based on the worst assumption. Because to predict the behavior of your enemy in situations like this, we should learn is not useful. We should have learned it way back in 1973. We thought we had learned a lesson in 73. We have certainly paid a high price for not learning that lesson. You do not rely on your intelligence services predictions. They can provide you, if you're lucky, with facts. Facts are then up to the government to use in any which way it thinks correct. But mostly, in my opinion, certainly based on our events of this past year, to take the worst case scenario and plan accordingly. To take anything but the worst case scenario these days seems dangerous. I don't know how else to call it. Now, the reality, like I said, the systems worked in an amazing fashion. I'm one who has always been a strong believer in the defensive systems. I don't buy the concept that if we didn't have the defense, we would have gone in earlier and we would have destroyed Hamas. Well, maybe we would have, but we didn't have the defensive systems. Certainly, our whole country would be open to being destroyed by people like Hamas. The first day they fired 3,000 rockets. If there were no defensive systems, at least, I don't know, 500, 1,000 would have landed on real targets and destroyed buildings and people and killed people. Didn't. They got a few through because the first day of the war we weren't fully ready. But by the second day of the war, when all of our systems were deployed, they started to get almost none through. Same thing with the Iranians. To fire 130 missiles, and maybe two or three, two of them landed on quote unquote targets. That's a pretty poor ratio, to say the least, and it certainly questions both the competency of their whole plan, as well as for a significant number of them blew up without our assistance. Let's put it that way. But it makes it very, very unlikely that they can rely on that force as a force to inflict damage on Israel in the future. Now, Hezbollah is something else, although I'm not totally convinced of that as well. They have many more missiles. And Iran has a lot of ballistic missiles. We're not sure how many, and they're limited how many that can reach us. And so, our defensive systems, we have enough in order to defend. I'm sure right now the factories are working 24/7 to build more interceptors for all three missile defense systems that we have. I hope we can build them fast enough. I'm sure we're building them as fast as we can, but they work. Once again, we're all looking for the time when the laser system is deployed. It's not totally clear. I've heard various stories, but most of them basically center around the beginning of 2025. And at that point, our defensive systems won't be hermetic, but they'll be as close to hermetic as one can get. And as close to my dream of a force field around Israel as the one way to solving our problems. Exaggerating a little bit, but that's always been my hope to some extent. Um, so so that's what happened on the Saturday night a week ago. I have to admit it was a little unnerving, to say the least the first few minutes. It was unnerving when they first announced the fact that schools were being closed tomorrow, and I was in the middle of a demonstration on Kaplan Street, and suddenly we all realized that something was already underway, which was the fact. The drones are already flying towards us. And then a few hours later, when they announced the missiles are in air heading towards Israel, um, that was a disturbing few minutes, let's put it that way. Followed by relief, followed by one day of euphoria, followed by everyone coming back down to earth and realizing, okay, we got through this day. We probably can get through other days like it, but we're not at all clear where we're all going. And I don't really know what. I've been back from a 2-week trip to this overseas now for a little over the week and a half. I don't think I've spoken to one friend or neighbor. I haven't met anyone optimistic, let's put it that way. There's no one optimistic who I've met. No one has a good sense of, why it'll be so much better in a month or 2 months. I listen to these hostages who are still hopeful that a miracle will take, hostage families, excuse me, sorry, that a miracle will take place, but they don't really know how that's likely to happen. And we don't really see any immediate hope for change. On the political front, it's really hard to see, even though the overwhelming majority of this country wants political change. Our system is such that it's going to be very, very difficult. I mean, it's 7 months, almost 7 months since October 7th, and except for one major, nobody has resigned, not in the army, not in the political scene, not in the government. Nowhere has anyone taken the ultimate responsibility and said, I'm responsible, I'm partly responsible, I'm 10% responsible, and said, okay, here are the keys to my office. I resign, I take responsibility. One major, that's it. And all this and the whole government military has taken responsibility. And when this is over, we really need some serious thought on rethinking a lot of different aspects, both of the military, the political system, all these things that have failed us miserably. And when I say fail us miserably, just as a side note, but it's not really a side note, it's an example. We're 7 months in, and on the kibbutzim that had the most damage, Be'eri, Kfar Aza, there hasn't been one building that has been built, one building that has been fixed. Nothing has been done to provide permanent solutions for the residents who are living in hotels or other places. Nothing. 6 months later. So you got to really wonder if in 6 months nothing has happened, how that's even possible. But that's the government we have. I wrote about today, and you read about it, but I'll just touch upon it briefly. This whole issue of sanctions to the Netzach Yehuda brigade, excuse me, the army. This is a brigade that was originally set up as what's called Nachal Haredi. It was going to be an example of Nachal, but just for the ultra-Orthodox. That didn't work out because there weren't enough ultra-Orthodox who actually ended up volunteering. So they filled it primarily with what's called Hardalim, which are people who are religious Zionists who sort of pushing towards ultra-Orthodox. Most of them are settlers. Most of them, a lot of them were what's called Noah Gvarot, hilltop youth, and people who the army didn't want. And instead, the army accepted them. They went into this unit. This unit has served until the war in the West Bank. And now they're not in the West Bank. They've moved them out. But let's just say there were a fair number of incidents that were not as good as one would like, to put it mildly. I mentioned one of them in today's update, you'll see. But I have to say something that going all the way back to the time that I did reserve duty in Gaza, which was, I think, the summer of 1980. I saw things that I felt were wrong and passed it on to higher people in the military who I knew outside the military chain. And it's just natural. There is no such thing as a good occupation, and we don't know how to get rid of this occupation. I'm not one of these people who say, end the occupation now, because I don't know what to do, how to end this occupation. But we need to realize that there is no such thing as a good occupation, certainly not one that goes on as long as this one does. And bad things happen. Let's put it that way. We have to make sure that we do our best to limit the number of bad things that happen, and also make sure that we take actions when bad things do happen. Because if we take actions, then the international community won't take actions against us. But politically, sometimes it's been very difficult. Okay, I think we're at the 6:30 mark, more or less. I think we'll come to a close here and take questions. So raise your hand or whatever, or indicate you want to ask. And if I don't see you, my wife no doubt will. So
Mark,
yes.
this is Rob Hillman. First, wishing you a good Pesach, but the best it can be, and under the circumstances. But I wanted to ask you about the sanctioning of the West Bank troops. You sort of mentioned the West Bank a minute ago. There's all those news reports, and it's hard to understand what that means.
Okay, so it's also a little bit hard to understand, even from our perspective. Two things you have to keep in mind. There are two different things going on. There were sanctions against individuals. Those were individual settlers who did X, Y, and Z. One of them, Bentzi Gupstein, who is so right-wing and so racist that the Supreme Court wouldn't allow him to run in the Israeli Knesset. That's one thing. And those are particular settlers who did particular things to the Palestinians that the Americans have seen, video recordings of, et cetera, et cetera. This thing against Netzach Yehuda, there was a law passed in the 1970s called the Lehi Amendment to the Foreign and Defense Acts. That basically says that the U.S. government cannot give funds to units that engage in violations of civil rights, or how we want to define, or participate in war crimes. The exact wording, I have the actual, in today's update, I'm sending a copy of the defense version of the Leahy Amendment. But basically, if a unit, a part of an army, does bad things, the United States cannot give military aid to that particular unit, not to that particular country, but to that particular unit. How that would actually work, since aid is fungible and all those things, that's a big question. Israel knew the fact that the unit was under investigation, and that the conclusion had been made that they had violated their civil rights, or however you want to define it, created war crimes by the unit. According to the terms of the amendment, the country in question has the right then to present evidence showing how it's ameliorated the actions that are being described in this report. And what happened was we sort of ignored it. There was a case that came up that I hadn't heard about, but it came up on Israeli television today, that during Afghanistan, a unit of the Australian Army was found to have committed war crimes. The United States spoke to the Australians and said we have to use the Bay Amendment against the military aid to Australia. The Australians returned and said, no, we have, we're doing this and this against those people involved in it. And the United States said, okay, you're dealing with it. We got, the Leahy Amendment does no longer counts. And so military aid continued to Australia. So that's where it stands at the moment. It's not clear how it works against a particular unit. I read somewhere that the unit can't participate in joint exercises. Believing this unit would never get involved in joint exercise with the Americans. One of the things about the unit is there are no women in it. The American Army, of course, is fully integrated at this point, as is most of the rest of the Israeli Army. So you really would never get involved in, work with the American Army at all. However, studio PSs, nameless studio. Hello? Studio PS, raise your hand.
Is that me?
Guess it's you, I don't know. You don't have, you
I
have
guess it will be.
associated with you, you're just Studio PS,
That's not me,
not you.
but I'm on.
You're on, so go ask the question.
Okay, so here's a couple of questions. One is as far as the Iranian attack, you didn't mention, and I don't know how much it's been mentioned, as far as that the U.S. kind of led that coalition in the Middle East. The coalition being the UAE, being Saudi, being Jordan. This was not exclusively the technology of Israel. This is something that they worked on in CENTCOM for years. And I'm wondering whether how this is reported along with the bon ami and the goodwill that, you know, nothing happened, thankfully, in Israel, but this was led by the United States within the coalition of other Middle Eastern countries. That's a fact. That's been reported on, at least in
Okay,
the U.S.
before you go further, I'll take the next question in a second. That is clearly reported.
Okay,
It's been well received here. What I'm saying, however, look, the coalitions intercepted all of the drones. And the drones were over a long distance. They flew slowly. There was plenty of time to intercept them. If the coalition had not participated, I'm not sure Israel had enough time or enough planes to intercept them. But the ability to knock down a very simple drone could have been done by World War II fighters, in reality. So it's not high tech. It was a coordinated, wonderful coordination by many countries and trying to orchestrate that. And the US definitely orchestrated that. And it's definitely well received, more than well received. Unfortunately, this country is never thankful. It's just sort of well received, but that's a different story. But there was no question that drones can be down. The idea of intercepting a ballistic missile in mid-flight, until we had done the first ones against the Houthis, had never been done before. And so that's the technology I'm talking about. The ability to intercept ballistic, not one, but 100 ballistic missiles simultaneously coming at you and knock them all down. That was a technological feat, because, you know, who knows whether it could be done. Not to mention, one of these ballistic missiles basically carried about the amount of explosives as 40 or 50 drones. So one of them landing in the wrong place could have done tremendous damage. But no, it was well reported here. It was well appreciated here. It was discussed here in all sorts of ways. Our problem is we don't understand the fact that we need to be able to give as well as receive in some ways. That's a different story. Sorry, go ahead. I know I interrupted you. You had multiple questions, so go ahead with your second question, if you have one.
Yeah, I do. What was your take? Well, I guess tangential. What was your takeaway from being in the U.S. and then I guess the corollary to your comment a second ago is the aid that the House has just passed.
Look,
and how that will affect how that will affect the relationship, this kind of tenuous relationship between the administration, the two administrations.
okay, so two parts. First of all, I was immensely gratified the fact that House Speaker Johnson has seen the light. You know, I was really quite worried. I was actually more worried for Ukraine than I was for us, because us, it would be a financial burden, to say the least, without this aid, and it may make things very difficult. But Ukraine, I think it was a matter of life and death that Ukraine gets the aid, because only the United States can provide that. So that's number one. Look, it certainly helps the relationship. There's two parts to this relationship. There's a relationship between the countries and there's a relationship between the governments. And, you know, as long as Netanyahu is in power, the relationship between the governments is not going to get better. And it doesn't make a difference whether it's Trump or Biden. Nobody trusts Netanyahu. And for different reasons, obviously. But no one trusts Netanyahu, and that's our problem all over the world. So anybody, whether he's right wing or left wing or centrist or whatever it would be, will start off in a better place than Netanyahu, because people will automatically trust an Israeli leader fully, but people don't trust our current leader, and so it makes things difficult. Passing of the aid is certainly going to help Israel without a doubt. Most of the items that the aid for Israel relates to are more long-term items. You know, it's developing the Arrow 4 program There's money there also for the laser system, but there's also money obviously to replenish the stocks that we would have done anyway. We have no choice, but the additional money will make that easier to do. And the Israeli budget is in tatters, let's put it that way. The Israeli government has not come to grips with the budgetary impact of the war. And as a result, Standard & Poor's lowered our credit rating on Thursday, which would have been a major story if it hadn't come in the midst of everything else that's going on. Okay. Anything else from you or anyone else? Okay. Nobody out there wants to ask any questions? Okay, who's this iPhone Studio? Okay, that really is the guy. Okay. So, anyone else out there? Any questions from anyone else? Okay, if no one has any questions. Then
I
right?
have one more.
Go ahead,
I've,
Joe.
I've, I have one more. Hey, Sari. And I know we spoke about not making predictions, but is there any, what's kind of the sense about like our retaliation now to Iran and whether this is now going to escalate or de-escalate?
The sense is this is over. This round is over. As I wrote last night, I thought this was one of the best decisions we've made in a long time. We calibrated it perfectly, in my opinion, in that we took out the radars of the anti-aircraft systems that the Iranians had by one of their nuclear sites. They only have 2 of these anti-missile systems in the country, and we took out the radar systems of one of them. We did it basically without them even knowing it. We used our own technology as long-range missiles that we have that I believe may or may not be supersonic. I'm not really sure, but they're very fast. They go a long distance, and our planes don't even have to enter Iranian airspace. They're standoff weapons with total accuracy. And so what we did was we proved to the Iranians that any site we want, we can hit, and they can't stop us in any which way. And that was the proof that we can do that. We did it in a way that didn't cause casualties and allowed the Iranians to not know and not claim that we had done it, and therefore they could climb down despite their claims that any attack on their soil would result in a massive retaliation. Well, they talk a big number. I don't think they have the missiles even right now for massive retaliation. The big ballistic missiles, they don't have all that many, and they're expensive. We don't know how many they exactly have, but I think so. I think this round is over. What'll happen next time, I don't know. We clearly will not stop attacking Iranians who are in Syria, trying to move Iranian forces in one way or another into Syria. That's a red line for us, and we will attack any of them that are there. And so will that result in another attack? I don't know. Nancy.
Got it. Thanks.
Hi, I had 2 thoughts. One was, could you say a word about Yair Golan and his possible role going forward? And also, do you think there's any chance that the Biden administration could successfully press Netanyahu to make a U-turn and agree to give Iron Dome technology to Ukraine?
Okay, the second one's an interesting one. So the first one, Yair Golan, that's a little bit easier. So I've met him a couple of times now. I was at that session Friday. I'm very impressed by him.
Okay.
I think he is the leader we need at this point, or can be the leader we need. He did not become chief of staff because he gave a speech on Israel Memorial Day, or maybe on Holocaust Day, it was Holocaust Day actually, warning of the signs of fascism within our own country. That, of course, was not well received by the Israeli right, and that stopped him from becoming chief of staff. Military people who I know who knew him as military people all say the best things possible about him. They really all say really great things about him. Obviously, we all learned on the 7th of October that he's a brave man. He single-handedly went down and saved quite a number of the music festival participants And he got calls from parents and literally parents of friends, and literally went down there and saved them. And so he's also a bit of a national hero. Where the left fits in all of this is hard to know exactly. So what's going to happen is there's going to be a merger of Labor Party, the Meretz Party, the Kibbutz movement, and possibly parts of the protest movement into creating one slate, one movement, etc. As they described it, and this Kenneth basically had everybody who was anybody in both of those parties speak. They all realized the mistakes they made in the past. They all realized that ideological purity is a disaster for them, and they realized that not everybody is going to agree with everything. And so the question comes, and I think this is Yair Orlan's view, is that, well, first of all, his biggest view is that we have to find a way of separating ourselves from the Palestinians. Some form of separation has to take place. The biggest danger long-term for the state of Israel is that we either become an apartheid state or we become a binational state. Neither of them is an acceptable long-term future for Zionism. He, on the other hand, actually believes, from what I could tell, that a Palestinian state is many years away, which would be my view as well. If he can walk that line, and amongst some of the people in Meretz, I think, have a more optimistic view of the Palestinians still, although I think a lot of them have come to their senses. If he can walk that line, then I think there is a chance that they could become a significant player in the elections. Obviously, they'll automatically get the 8, the 4 from Meretz and the 4 from Labor that are out there. But can they get back up to 15 or 18? Polls sort of say they can, but we'll have to see. What they need, and they understand this, is a clear vision of the future, because none of the other parties have a vision of the future. And so if you have some sort of vision, you might be able to get more people that would not naturally agree with you, but at least can buy into your vision. And vision is what we need more than anything else. And the second question was Ukraine. Look, I am a strong believer, and I've written a long time ago that the two things that have made me most embarrassed to be an Israeli over the last 10 years have been the fact that we didn't get involved in the Syrian civil war and let people die, and the fact we didn't come immediately to the aid of the Ukrainians. We have to be on the side of what's right and not always in our national interests, because if it's always in our national interest, then how do we make any claims about what people didn't do during the Holocaust? How do we say, why didn't America rescue all the Jews? I mean, getting inside all the complications relating to that, but where do we have the moral right to say that when we had the ability to rescue 500,000 people and we didn't because it wasn't in our national interests? And where is it said that Ukrainians should die because we've decided it's not in our natural interest to anger the Russians, who are now 100% against us in every way they can be, and are clear collaborators with the Iranians? So I think we need to get on the right ship fully, and we have to fully commit ourselves. And yes, we need to share our technology. There is a little bit of a problem, though. On one hand, there is a worldwide shortage of arms. And that's something we need to keep in mind. It's not only here. I mean, the Ukrainians, we're talking about the money that's being released by the US Congress, hopefully this week when Biden signs. It won't solve all the problems because no one's making enough artillery shells, for instance. And no one is making enough Iron Dome interceptors, frankly. And so the question becomes, okay, we want to help the Ukrainians, but before we help the Ukrainians, we need to make sure we have enough Iron Dome interceptors to deal with the war with Hezbollah. So I think we absolutely should find ways of helping them. We should find ways of helping them directly, but we're not in the same position we were a year ago when we thought we could afford, not financially, but from a military stockpile position, to give up some of the batteries that we have, because we need every battery we have and we need every interceptor. So, okay, Gloria.
There we go. Unmute. Hello from Canada. I read on your, there was a comment that you made that you and your wife had attended a rally outside of the Tel Aviv Art Museum, and that Rabbi David Lau
Right.
had spoken, and your wife commented, "Where has this rabbi been for the last 6 months?" I was curious, what was it that he said, or what?
Okay, there were two things basically. One, it was how he said it. I'm not a great fan of Rabbi Lau's. It's a whole complicated thing, but he gave one of the best speeches with the most emphasis. It was dynamic and the most empathy he showed. He showed empathy towards the hostages. One of the big problems that Israelis feel about this current government is that empathy is not something they've been doing. President Biden has spoken to all of the families that are half Americans or partly Americans 3, 4, 5 times at this point, individually, on the phone, in groups, etc., etc. There are many, there are many, there are many hostage families that have not heard from any cabinet member even once. You know, a couple of weeks ago, one of the Americans, dual citizens, we learned that he had been killed in captivity. The father received a phone call from President Biden, from Secretary of State Blinken, from Vice President Harris, and from no Israeli leader. So the empathy, there's an empathy factor that's really been missing in these last 6 months. Something about this government, they just can't show empathy, which I don't understand. I understand the politics sometimes. I don't understand the empathy issue. Makes no sense to me. Okay, iStudios raised their hand again, or has it always been up there? Still there. Okay. Claude.
Quick question. The news on the West Bank of Israeli settlers is getting a lot of press in the United States. Yesterday, you killed a Palestinian ambulance driver and so on and so forth. What's being done to cure this problem, Mark?
Cure this problem. The minister in charge of defense security in the West Bank is Smotrich, a settler who basically was planning terrorist activity against the government when we pulled out of the Gaza Strip. He is the Minister of Finance. Nothing else I can say. Nothing else I can say. We need a new government. There's just no two ways about it. This is something that needs to be done, needs to be taken care of. It hurts us tremendously. It's part of the whole problem of the fact that, okay, there are two sets to our problems in the world. One is facts, like these facts are terrible, and B, our inability to explain anything. I mean, look at something else. It almost went over everyone's head, right? Blinken yesterday made the comment that the only thing standing between a ceasefire in Gaza is Hamas. That Israel made major concessions and Hamas refused them. And yet, all the calls, ceasefire now, ceasefire now, ceasefire now. Is anyone calling on Hamas to engage in a ceasefire? Is it even discussed in any serious way? How much coverage did Blinken's comments make in the United States? I doubt very much. So therein lies the second part of the problem. We don't know how to do Hasbara. We've never known. I've talked about this time and time again. We don't know how to do active Hasbara, which means doing things that will look good, and we don't know how to explain the things that we do. So, the fact that people are still talking about hunger, coming starvation. So Kogat, which is the army division that's responsible for the territories, sends out a tweet and talks about how 5 million or 4.5 million pita breads are being baked every day in Gaza. So they issue a tweet. Does it get anywhere? Does anyone hear it? Is it on major news media? Does anyone hear the fact that there's more than enough pita bread now in Gaza to feed everybody? No. One thing I recommend, I don't think I'll get it in today, but maybe I will. Dan Senor has a podcast, and he had one with Scott Galloway. If anyone knows the name, Scott Galloway is mostly a tech writer, a tech entrepreneur. He has one of his most well-known podcasts is together with Kara Swisher. But I'll put the name of the podcast in tonight of that podcast. He's someone who's Jewish through his mother, but grew up not particularly Jewish or at all, and came to visit Israel for the first time in 30 years this past weekend, or the weekend before, not the weekend of the missile attack. And he talks about how the fact that, everyone only sees one part and doesn't understand at all what's going on here in Israel in any which way. So I recommend that podcast. I'll try to put a link to it tonight. Okay. Anyone else? Okay, so I will wish everybody as happy a Passover as one can have. It will be a very strange one here in Israel, without a doubt. The country is divided between those people who say we shouldn't celebrate it at all, to those people who say dafka, we have to celebrate it, and to those people in the middle who say, well, let's celebrate it and leave an empty table at every empty chair, excuse me, at every table, excuse me. So minimally everyone do that. It's the festival of freedom, and yet it's very hard to talk about freedom when we have some number, 50, 70, 100 hostages who are not free at all, and with no immediate signs that they're going to be free anytime soon. So in any case, I wish you all a Chag Kasher V'Sameach, happy as it can be. And we'll reconvene here in 2 weeks. I just want to note the fact that we've passed 3,000 subscribers, not paid, but 3,000 subscribers to the Tel Aviv Diary in the last day. And so thank everyone for subscribing. Thank everybody who's a paid subscriber, and please pass it on. My goal is in a year from now to reach 10,000. See how close I can get. Anyway, thank you all. Have a great 2 weeks as best as can be. And we'll meet again in 2 weeks.